From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. It is every parent's worst nightmare to lose a child. For the McLellan family in Strathroy, Ontario, that was only the beginning of a tumultuous journey that is still ongoing. In late October 2015, Roseanne McLellan was called at her job as a teacher by the operator of a daycare she had left her 15-month-old son, Nathaniel, a few hours earlier. She was told that he was acting strange and she needed to come get him. She met Megan Van Hoof, the childcare worker, on the street and saw her son.
He was stiff. Everything was stiff, like straight. His eyes were not open. So when I looked at him, I said, "Oh, Nate, Nate?" And I could see this red scratch on the top of his ear that wasn't there when I dropped him off. I was crying and I was telling him, "I'm gonna give you help. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna be okay. I'm just saying on."
After getting him to the hospital, the child was found to have extensive brain injury, and suspicion quickly fell onto the parents. A few days later, Nathaniel's father, Kent, thought he was going to the police station to receive more information about what had happened to his son. Here is what he was told.
And so we started off, they said, Kent, you have the right to a lawyer. You need to be aware that anything you say here, you could be charged with. We are seeking a manslaughter charge. And she said, well, Kent, your son had a 9-centimeter fracture in the back of his head. I never heard about a 9-centimeter fracture. That was the first time. No doctor, no nurse, nobody said about a 9-centimeter fracture in the back of my son's head. That was the first time I heard it because it took me back. Like it knocked me off my feet that he had such a severe fracture in the back of his head.
What follows is an extraordinary story of a seemingly tunnel vision approach to the police investigation, conflicting medical information and reports, and a family's fight for innocence and justice for their lost son. It is an incredible tale that was recently investigated and told in the 5-part series Death in a Small Town by Kevin Donovan, the Star's chief investigative reporter, which is now available online at the Star. He joins us now to take us behind the scenes and provide additional personal commentary on this story. Kevin, thank you so much for making the time and coming back on to This Matters once again.
Delighted to be here.
Kevin, everybody should go read this. This is an incredible story, and I'd like you to tell us just a little bit about it, but also, how did you come across this case and how long have you been working on this investigation?
Yeah, both excellent questions. 2015 is when the case begins. In the spring of 2017, I coached youth soccer for many years in Etobicoke, and a parent of a girl that I'd coached many years before called me up and said, listen, I want to meet. Can we have a coffee? And she was very nervous about it. And we got together at a second cup and she started telling me this story, which is very similar to the story that is now in the pages of the Toronto Star and on our app. And she is the sister-in-law of the McLellan family. And she said she didn't really have permission to involve me, but she thought it might help get some answers for the family. So I ended up, through Diane, talking to Roseanne and Kent by email. And then in June of 2017, they said, sure, you can come down and talk to us. And that's really when it started for me.
As you brilliantly tell in your piece, Roseanne and Kent were the parents of Nathaniel McLellan, who was a 15-month-old who is basically the center of this entire story. Unfortunately, he passed away, and there's a lot of things that you investigated about what happened there. I guess the first thing is what did you first think of the McLellan family when you met them?
Yeah, my first impression came from arriving at their place. They live out in the country, not too far from where I grew up in Lambeth, Ontario. And driving through the cornfields to their house on a dead-end road with only another couple of houses there took me back to my childhood and sort of a simpler life than the one I have in Toronto. And when I met them, they welcomed me into their house. And as soon as they started telling the story of what had happened, there were a lot of tears. They're very upset. But what I noticed in them, and this is, I think, represented in one of the stories, is that they're very different. Kent, the father, he's very, I won't say quite shy. He's very reasoned. He sits back, asks questions, listens. And Roseanne is always, or at least always was at the time, pounding on the table. And I remember I was recording this first interview. I actually had to ask for a tablecloth to be folded over so when she hit the table, it wouldn't affect the recording too much. And for her, and we in the media deal with stories like this from time to time, but for them, this was very new. And they had never dealt with what I'm going to call the system. They had never dealt with police. They had never dealt with lawyers before. They certainly hadn't dealt with coroners or doctors. And it was completely new to them. And fast forward now, Roseanne, I think, is one of the most educated people in Ontario when it comes to understanding how child deaths should be investigated. And she's really made herself a student of the law and is learning all the time. This is from a person who didn't have a cell phone that day when her son was rushed to hospital.
I think one of the reasons I wanted to ask about your impressions is that one of the things that really came under the microscope was the way that Kent and Roseanne and their family acted in the hospital when their son was injured. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that potentially might have colored this investigation?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time in the first couple of stories dealing with the observations of nurses, social workers, and doctors in the hospital. And these all come from search warrant documents related to the case. And so when you read the stories, you'll see that the McLellans, particularly Roseanne, are accused of being bizarre, having bizarre behavior, not asking enough questions of the doctors, asking questions like, is he going to survive? And the doctors and nurses seem to think that they should be asking questions, well, how did this happen? And so this, to me, from looking at all of the information and doing so many interviews, is what created a tunnel vision for the Strathroy Police and the OPP. They were interpreting, and I would say misinterpreting, their reactions. Diane, the sister-in-law who brought the story to the Star originally, I won't use all of her colorful language, but what she said to me is, if this had happened to my son or daughter and they were asking me questions, I would lose my, you can fill in the blanks. And another person I interviewed for the story said, when somebody's in a time of crisis, you don't know how they're going to behave.
Everybody came running. They took him from my arms. They put him on the stretcher. They wheeled him back. And I was praying to my mom because she's gone. And I was pacing and I walked out and I locked myself out. So I had to walk back around. And then I realized when I came around that my purse and the car seat and everything's on the floor all over the main entrance of the Emerge. And I kind of gathered that up, carried it back. And they were all just crazy working. They were all busy.
And some people will cry. Some people will pray. Some people will be stony silent. And I think it's important that police detectives, when they're investigating these cases, understand that and not try and take too much from how somebody behaves in a moment of crisis.
We'll be right back. This is one of the biggest things about this story, the fact that Nathaniel died, and immediately the focus of the police investigation was on the parents. You had a line in your piece about this was the appearance of a tunnel vision approach to policing. I think we need to step back. Just explain what tunnel vision approach to policing is, and then maybe a little bit about why you think this happens.
Well, okay, so let's take the case. You're a detective. You're assigned to investigate something. A good detective will gather information and consider all the possibilities. And only when the good detective has enough information to support a theory do they really pursue that theory solely and in the absence of any other theories. What happened in this case, and I've seen this in many other cases, is they had an idea at the start and they went after that idea. And what I learned in this story is that the police actually received information from the medical personnel within the first couple of weeks that should have prevented this tunnel vision. But for whatever reason, and the police aren't speaking to me, for whatever reason, they did not widen their scope.
And their standard line, the police's standard line to everything is, we're doing this for Nate. That's what they say to everything. We're doing this for Nate. That's what they always say. This is for Nate. We're doing this for Nate.
I think one of the other really, really interesting things here is you only mentioned it as a line, but you and I have talked about this a little bit previously. You had to go to court to access the documents. Was this another situation where you were the lawyer?
Yeah, and in fact, it was really the first one where I acted as a lawyer, although I'm not a lawyer. Although we were recently successful at the Supreme Court of Canada on an important media case. When I first started looking into this, and I knew that there'd been a police investigation, I thought, there's got to be search warrants. And so at the time, actually, I reached out to one of the star lawyers, Ryder Gilliland, who helped me just kind of get started on this process. And then the next thing I know, during a snowstorm, I was in a London court in, I think, late 2017, appearing before Justice Skoronsky, who had been the judge who authorized some of these warrants and production orders. And warrants and production orders are important to me because behind them are hundreds of pages of witness interviews. So the police have done all of these interviews and they record them in sort of a transcript form in these documents. And they're always sealed when I come looking for them. And so Justice Skoronsky was great. And I thought the Crown Attorney was ultimately great as well. And they released the information to me over a period of about 6 months. And I'm sitting here in my office at home looking at all these search warrants. And there's, I think, about 8 or 9 of them. And each one is a little bit different. For example, and you have to read them all because there's a doctor in one case who is really, really important to this. And in one search warrant, there's about a half page of notes. And then 2 months later, I knew there was another search warrant and I got that one. And there's 7 or 8 pages of his notes. That's the sort of thing that really, for me, moves my investigation forward because then I get to see, basically you become a fly on the wall of that investigation. Of course, we do our own investigation, but I always like to see what the police have done first.
I think, Kevin, one of the other things in your story is at the beginning of this process, it seemed like everybody was quite open to this because I think they seem to think it was probably some sort of an open shut case, but some people have been a little bit less so as things have gone on and as your investigation is carried on. Is that fair to say?
I've been trying to get the police to talk about this case since I got onto it. And I remember being driving out to that area in the summer of 2018, and I had contacted the police officers and heard back from a public relations person with the OPP who said, yeah, we'll set that interview up for you. It'll be great. And I'm thinking, this is fantastic. Really delighted the police want to speak about this. And then an hour later, I'm told there's no way that any of these cops are going to talk to you. And so that's unfortunate because really that is the voice that is missing there. One thing that will help in that is in a court action that the McLellans are taking and which the Toronto Star is intervening in. We're trying to obtain all the audio tapes and videotapes of all the police interviews. I mean, the police interviewed the babysitter, recorded it. They interviewed twice Roseanne and Kent. They also interviewed Roseanne and Kent's children at the time, 3 little children who were 6, 8, and 10, without any parent present or any responsible guardian. And so I hope to get those this year, and that's going to tell us a lot. I really want to hear the tone of the officer and what they are asking Roseanne and Kent.
Kevin, you just mentioned the babysitter who we have not spoken about. This is a woman named Megan Van Hoof. She is key to this. She was the person who was on scene when potentially Nathaniel was at least showing signs of distress. She's the person who transferred over to the mother who then rushed her to the hospital. I believe you've had some brief interviews with her, but she's really not talking at all, right?
That's right. I mean, my practice is always to go to people early on in an investigation, and I certainly went to Megan and tried to talk to her. I spoke to her 3 times, either on the phone or at her door, and she offered some denials. She said she didn't have much to say about what she referred to as the accident, but doesn't say anything more. In her defense, there are several civil actions going on in this case, and in Megan's defense, she has said that the police have cleared her of anything. I have no independent proof of that. And she said that she did nothing wrong. Absent anything else from her, that's her statement, which is what we've reported in the Star.
Kevin, what do you think is sort of the most important thing about this investigation? Is it the tunnel vision theory? Was there a number of mistakes happened from the police and from medical staff? I mean, it just seems like a perfect storm of a bunch of bad things that happened to this family.
Yes, and one of the theories I have in the Strathroy Police Department around the time that Nathaniel was rushed to hospital, they were just concluding another case, very high-profile case in that area where a child died and the mother and boyfriend were ultimately convicted of something related to the death of that little baby. And I think the police in Strathroy took that and thought that the McLellans may have been involved because the other parent was involved that they just investigated. And so what can we take from this is that Ontario has a very checkered past when it comes to investigating child deaths, and child deaths are very difficult to investigate. There's typically very few witnesses, sometimes no witnesses to something that happens. And the forensics are more difficult with children as well, I would say. And so police need better training. They need to gather information and then sit back and look at it before they go the next step. And another issue that has come up, we're 5.5 years into this. The McLellans have suffered a death in their family, and they are trying to get answers from the system, and the system won't talk to them. The police won't speak to them. The police have only shared the most minor bits of information with them. And the other thing is that the McLellans, they only were able to get these medical reports by turning into almost undercover sleuths, because they started going 2 years after to meet the doctors who had looked at their son's case. Those doctors by that time came forward and gave them quite good information. And Roseanne had her iPhone going, and she recorded those. And now we have those recordings, and they form part of our investigation. Parents shouldn't have to do that to get answers.
Absolutely, Kevin. And you bring up this idea of child deaths. I know that, you've covered a lot of things. Were there any similarities to previous investigations that you've done in this case?
Well, there's certainly, it's not at all like the high profile Barry and Honey Sherman case. That's for sure. This is the first time most people will have ever heard of this case. I do see a lot of similarities to stories, cases that Moira Welsh and I investigated in the 1990s, child deaths that were misinvestigated, either too much focus put on the parents, not enough focus put on the parents. It seems to be this area of criminal law that Ontario does not do a good job. And I think the McLellan family, their goal in being public about all this is that they want to help other families down the line. They want people to learn from their mistakes. In the days of probably when you and I started as reporters, there were a lot of inquests that were held. We don't do a lot of those anymore. And this, I don't know if there will ever be any sort of charges in this case, but it certainly is the type of case that would be well served, and the public would be well served if there was some sort of an inquest, some way to examine it. We've done our best at the Toronto Star, but more of an official examination, I think, would be quite good.
I think the other thing you said that just mystifies me is I'm amazed that we never heard anything about this story at all. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
We only learn about these cases when they happen if either the family or the police make some sort of statement. And apart from a very brief police statement that went out in the first couple of days of Nathaniel going to hospital, nothing else came out. And this particular family, they were not, they're media savvy now, but they were not media savvy back in those days. And so they didn't know. And in fact, they were very shy about talking to us until I explained to them that, the Toronto Star was serious about this. So a lot of these things happen and they get covered up. I guess it's the job of journalists to try and shine some of a spotlight on them.
So Kevin, where are things at now with the family and with you and this investigation?
Well, the stories are rolling out right now, and I spoke to the family. They were very pleased that their story is being told. There were some tears because it's a very emotional time for them with this all coming out. I went to see them Monday night just to kind of brief them on how big the story was going to be in the Star, and just they have children who are of the age that they might be aware of social media, and just to say, these days you got to watch out for that. Make sure that your kids are being protected out there in the social media world. After Nathaniel died, Roseanne was pregnant with William, and William is now a couple of years old. And Bella, their daughter, has been welcomed into the world in the last little while. And they seem to be a very happy family, but they are still focused. And Roseanne is particularly focused on getting justice for Nathaniel. So for me, going forward, I've just obtained some new documents related to the case, and I'm going to be doing a story on them. My hunt continues.
And according to the police, this is still an active investigation.
Yeah, the police say it's an active investigation. I think that they're saying that as a way to stop the Toronto Star from getting access to information that we've been seeking. If they say it's an active investigation, they have better chance of success in keeping things sealed. The police 2 years ago asked for yet another medical report, this one from Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children. They've had that report now for 11 months. They won't say what's in it. It's a report by a pediatrician at the hospital. And I think at a certain point, the OPP has to say, this is a cold case. They haven't said that. And I'm hoping that this press that we've given to it is going to help them either say it's a cold case or make a statement related to the case that will actually move it forward in the justice system.
Kevin, I really, really want to thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me on.
Kevin Donovan is the chief investigative reporter at the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajan Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etizaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.